My name is Michael Potts, and I have written a novel called End of Summer. It's been described as a story about a young boy, an old man, and a journey of the heart. Michael Colonnese, author of Sex and Death, I Suppose, and Temporary Agency, referred to it as a deeply moving and passionate book, a poignant literary novel about childhood and memory. This is contemporary Southern fiction at its best. I'm going to read part of chapter 1 and then part of another chapter to give you a sense of what the book is about. Chapter 1. It all started with the rabbit, I said out loud, stepping out of my Chevy S10, ice-covered grass crunching under my boots. The barren hayfield where I'd hunted with Granddaddy 30 years before looked the same. God, how time runs away like life. The cold gray sky threatened snow. I plodded ice-slicked earth, exploring the place I once called home. I lived here 18 years, from which only college in Nashville forced me to leave. Thoughts invaded my mind, day terrors I tried to squelch. Closing my eyes, I held my gloved hands against my ears, but the memories did not stop. They forced themselves inside, thoughts of my 9th year. Until that time, I lived in oblivion, a ghost stuck in purgatory. Before that year, Death had made multiple visits, stretching his bony fingers to shake the hands of family members. My fraternal twin, Michael, died 2 hours after birth, drowning from fluid in his lungs. When I was 2, my mom and dad were killed in a head-on collision with a tractor-trailer. I was reared by my granddaddy and granny, who had lived with my folks in the same rented home. I remembered neither my parents' lives nor their deaths. I suppose that's a blessing and a curse. My grandparents had provided details my young mind could understand, but I pushed them away. I did not want them. Back in that field after 30 years, I stood poised at the edge of an abyss. The darkness was middle age, yielding itself into an even darker old age, then death. Utter blackness at the hand of a curved sickle. I remembered the previous 6 months of counseling with my therapist, Dr. Goodman. I never liked the idea of going to a counselor, but my wife, Lisa, insisted. I knew she loved me, but I hated going to the sessions. They were necessary because I obsessed constantly about death. My library at home held over 3,000 books, 500 concerned with death and dying. In my home office, my computer rested on a small brown wooden desk, shiny with varnish. I sat in a cheap but comfortable black office chair I bought at Walmart. Around the desk were 2 bookcases, a 2-drawer filing cabinet, a TV stand with an old Sears black and white TV, and a Radio Shack component stereo system. This space was my cubby, my manhole, my hideout from the world where I could read, write, or surf the internet. My obsessions had grown worse over the past year. A few months before, I had ordered a human jawbone online. "Why a jawbone?" Lisa asked as we sat on the porch. I was sipping a shot of George Dickel whiskey while she had a glass of Chardonnay. "Because we couldn't afford a whole skull," I said, taking another sip. "That bothers me. I know you collect animal skulls, and that's okay with me. But a human skull, part of a real person who once lived, isn't that going too far?" I couldn't answer. I wondered myself. The best I could come up with was, in the Middle Ages, scholars had skulls in their work area to remind them in the midst of life we were in death. "Couldn't a plastic skull send the same message?" Lisa asked. "You might need to talk to somebody about this." "I'll think about it." Speaking of doctors, such as Dr. Goodman, I was also fascinated with hearts. In addition to the 500 books about death, I owned over 100 books on the heart, cardiology text, the Mayo Clinic Heart Book, cardiac arrest and resuscitation. With money I made from reviewing a textbook, I ordered a plasticized sheep heart from a biological supply house. I kept a stethoscope in my desk drawer and listened to my own heart at least once a day. But the heart was always more than a mere interest. Over the years it had become fetish. From the time I was 12 and puberty hit, I desired to listen to a female heartbeat. If I saw an attractive woman walking by, I would notice the usual items boys notice. But one of my first thoughts was, how does her heartbeat sound? As long as I can remember, I've been shy and socially awkward and dated only 2 women before I met Lisa. I never told the others about my fetish. I was afraid they would think I was a freak. With Lisa, I waited a month after our marriage to confess. We were sitting on her blue couch, my head on her lap. We were getting ready to go to a nice dinner at Red Lobster, and I knew Lisa was in a good mood. We sat down on the couch and I kissed her. After the passionate kisses, I moved my head down to her chest, hearing her racing heartbeat. Suddenly the thought entered my mind that I needed to let her know about my fetish. My desire for her combined with my fear, my heart raced to the point that my body started to shake with the force of my heartbeats. Lisa sensed that I was tense and put her hand on my chest. "Your heart's racing, honey. You okay?" "I'm fine." "Something must be bothering you. You've always worried about every bad thing you've done, like the time you lied to your 3rd-grade teacher about being in a fight. You still feel guilty about that. So what terrible thing do you think you've done now?" It's something weird." "Why don't you just tell me what's bothering you, and then we'll go out to dinner? Remember dinner at Red Lobster? If we leave any later, we'll have to wait in line an hour." "I like listening. I like to hear your heartbeat. That's why I put my head on your chest so much." "Is that all? Here, I'll help you." She pulled my head between her breasts, and I rested there, basking in the fast, regular rhythm, feeling myself becoming more aroused than I already was. What's the big deal about wanting to listen to my heart? It's kind of romantic in a way. I shifted my head so that I could look into Lisa's green-blue eyes. It turns me on, more than breast, more than anything. The sound of a woman's heart turns me on. It's like I'm hearing your life, the life of the woman I love. I'm going to now read from a portion of chapter 2. As we drew closer to the thicket, we saw a flattened area of grass that water covered after every heavy rain. On cold winter days, when the water had frozen into a thin film of white ice, crystals formed intricate patterns on the surface. Granddaddy and I put on our boots, went out to the field, and crunched frost-covered grass until we reached the ice pond. There we stood and gazed at a rainbow of red, orange, yellow, and blue light splitting into colors as it reflected off the ice. A thin film of slick, shiny water covered the ice, and I was tempted to stand on it to see if I would fall through. I knew Granddaddy would stop me. Although the water was less than a foot deep, he was not going to take a chance with me, his only grandchild. "Anyway, you might catch cold if you got wet," he said. Now it was summer, and the water had evaporated. Granddaddy and I walked into the indentation. Deep cracks covered the clay that had dried beneath the new grass. We reached the border of the thicket. As we crossed the threshold of the first trees, I felt a sense of accomplishment. We had arrived. The leaves of the trees were the darkest green they would be before the heat and dry weather of July and August drained their colors pale. They gave welcome shade. For a while the morning was cool. June days in Middle Tennessee warmed as fast as hands held in front of a coal-burning stove. Granddaddy said, "Let's find a good spot to sit." We looked around for a space between the trees and found a flat spot with a bed of leaves. "Got something for you," Granddaddy said, and I noticed for the first time that Granddaddy had snatched a couple of Cokes from the fridge, right under Granny's nose. He took a bottle opener from his pocket, opened both Cokes, and handed me one of the glass bottles. "Thanks, Granddaddy," I said, and drank the whole Coke in a few gulps. The middle of the thicket was dark, but cool and comfortable, and I lay down with my eyes closed while Granddaddy finished his Coke. Fuzzy came and licked my face. I hoped then that summer would last forever, that I would never grow up, that Granddaddy wouldn't get any older, or if he did, he would live until I was at least 21. I figured that since I had to grow up, I might be able to handle Granddaddy dying if I was an official adult. When I said my prayers at night, I asked God, please let Granddaddy live at least till I'm grown. I hoped that God would understand how close Granddaddy and I were and keep us together as long as he could. I refused to dwell on those thoughts and focused on the flashes of light and shadow I saw as I opened my eyes and looked up at the sky. Branches swayed in a fresh breeze as the green canopy hiding the sky shifted between opening and closing. The odor of old leaves mixed with distant honeysuckle made me long for something I could not name. Granddaddy liked to play word games, and I found them funny. As I sat up, Granddaddy said, "Jeff, the left stick stop step," and I laughed. I asked, "Can we go to the vine swing?" And Granddaddy said, "Yeah, if I can find the darn thing," and off we went. Fuzzy walked around sniffing every leaf on the ground. The vine swing was one of the larger vines in the thicket, thick enough to support my weight. It hung between two trees, about 2.5 feet off the ground. I enjoyed swinging on it in the past and hoped it was still there. Fortunately, the thicket was not big, and it was not long before Granddaddy called out, "Here it is," near the knotted pine tree close to the fence. I sat in the middle of the vine and swung with glee, thrilled to fly free in the air. I could see across Mr. Blake's fence into his field. Brown beef cattle with their white faces and bellies bounced up and down with every upstroke of the swing. The Blake small white farmhouse stood like a shining beacon of stability beyond the field. Time ticked like the wait for Christmas, but without the pain of anticipation. It was as if the joy and play and feeling of rest beneath the warm sun were combined in one timeless moment. The swinging had to end, more from tiredness of muscle than from weariness of desire. I jumped off the vine, climbed onto that bent trunk of the knotted tree, and sat down. I asked Granddaddy to tell me a story. I loved Granddaddy's stories even though he repeated them. But today Granddaddy told me a new story. I once knew a man who sleepwalked. One night his wife didn't see him stand up and walk out the door. He hooked his horse to a buggy, got in the driver's seat, and started riding. He must have rode 5 or 10 miles down an old dirt road before he woke up. He had no idea where he was. He'd lit the lantern when he was sleeping, which was a good thing, so the moon wasn't out that night. So he took it off the buggy and looked around. Eventually his old beagle hound who'd run after him from home found him, and the poor man figured he'd made the whole trip in his sleep. Put the beagle in his seat, turned around, and drove home. Scared his wife half to death when he opened the door. Don't think he ever did anything like that again. Can people really walk in their sleep? Funny things folks do sometimes. I thought for a moment about the man making his way without seeing, but could not quite figure it out. I only knew I was getting hungry again, and while I hated to leave the thicket, I understood it was time to go. Granddaddy picked up the Coke bottles and said, "We'd better get back before your granny starts hollering because we're late to dinner." So we left, man and boy and dog, and passed by the place where we sat on dry leaves, past the last trees in the thicket and into the field. The grass appeared as if it had been struck by sun fire, lit by golden light, too bright, too precious to bear. I held my right hand over my eyes adjusted, and all three of us walked toward the gate. End of Summer, available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online booksellers. My website is michael-potts.com.